Welcome back to Learn Mograph, and today we're going to be taking a look at the linear expression and how you can create a Mograph style effector without having to use any third-party software or plugins. Let's dive right in and take a closer look. Now that we're in After Effects, I have a whole bunch of small square layers here arranged in a grid pattern. Now I want to create an effector that as it moves over this grid, it applies a transform property to these shapes. And I think I want it to work on the opacity of a layer. So as our effector moves over the grid, our different shape layers here reduce themselves in opacity as the effector gets closer to them. And then as it gets further away, they bring back up their full color. So we're going to start by creating our effector. And to do this, we're going to go up to our shape tool here, our rectangle tool, press and hold on it and go down to ellipse tool. And we're just going to hold shift and drag out an ellipse shape. And we're going to press Command or Control Option Home on our keyboard to center up our anchor point, and Control or Command Home on our keyboard to center it up within our composition. And we're just going to rename this Effector. We're going to change the color of our layer here just so we can find it better. We're going to twirl down our ellipse options, and we're just going to go into our ellipse path, and we're going to change the size to something like 200. And that's going to be our fall off distance to when our shape layer gets close enough to our grid here to start affecting it. And then the center is going to be when it takes full effect. So our opacity should be absolute 0 once the center of our effector is over that shape. And I'm also going to right-click our effector, and I'm just going to change it into a guide layer. So that way, when we want to render this circle here won't show up in our final renders. I'm just going to resize our timeline panel a little bit so we have some more room to work in. And I'm going to twirl down our first layer. And I'm going to twirl down the options in our layer 1 here, which is our top left corner. And I'll zoom into that so we can see it a little bit better. I'm going to twirl this down, twirl down transform, and we're going to go to our opacity option. We're going to Alt or Option click the stopwatch, and we're going to begin writing our expression in here. We can delete what's in here already, and we're going to start by creating variables. And these variables we're going to use in conjunction with our linear expression to help drive this effect. So we're going to use the word var to declare our first variable, and this is going to be P1 for the position of this layer. And that P1 is just going to be set equal to this layer dot transform dot position. Now we can set a variable for the position of our effector, var P2 equals, and we can use this pick whip here to just select our effector and add transform dot position. The next variable we're going to declare is going to be the fall off distance. So that's the distance between when the effect begins taking place and when it has reached its full potential. So in this case, 0% opacity. So we're going to call that one var fall. And we're going to pick whip that to our effector size parameter. And we're just going to put divided by 2. So that just takes the radius of our effector instead of the entire size of our effector. Next, we're going to be figuring out the distance between position 1 and position 2. So to do that, we're going to declare another variable. We're going to call that the delta. And we're going to use the function sub, and we're going to plug in P1 and P2 for our values. Now we need to take our delta and find the distance. We're going to declare a variable, d for distance, and we're going to use the function length and plug delta into the length. And now we can actually execute our linear expression. So we're going to type linear. Our first parameter we're going to plug in is d for distance. And that d is going to be set from 0, which is going to be when our effector is directly on top of our layer. And it's going to begin at our fall position. So in our case, that's going to be the edge of the radius of our effector. And that's going to take our opacity from 0 when it's directly on top of it to 100 once the effector has passed over it. And we're going to close that out with a semicolon, and we're going to test this out. So now we can take our effector, and as we drag that over our layer, we'll see that that layer is reduced to 0 opacity. And you can see that down here in our timeline. We can actually adjust our effector with our arrows on our keyboard until we get it to actual 0 when it's right on top. And the cool thing about creating your expression this way, especially with the fall off, is that allows us to take our size and we can adjust that so we can have a bigger or smaller area that we're affecting. You can see as we increase the size, it begins to affect this layer as it passes over it. We're going to leave that at 200, just because I think that's a pretty good size for this grid that we have here. In order to get this linear expression to the rest of our layers, we can right-click our opacity and click Copy Expression Only. Now if we press U on our keyboard to close up our layers, we can select the rest of our layers, in our case, layer 2 to layer 81, and press Command or Control V to paste that expression onto our layers. It might take a second depending on how many layers you do have there. And we've now applied that expression over there. And now we can just take our effector, and as we're moving it over our layers, you can see that it's affecting the opacity. Now I can actually reduce the size of our stroke so you can see this a little bit better. Make this larger. If we wanted this to get the layers down to 0% opacity before it's directly on top of them, because you can see it's kind of a sharp fall off here, we can go back into our first layer, press EE on our keyboard, and if we just change this 0 to something like 25, and again, we can right-click, Copy Expression Only, and paste this on the rest of our layers, you can see that the fall off is much shorter and we have a much more obvious effect going on here. And this is a cool little rig that you can use to affect the opacity, the scale, the rotation. You can even use it in conjunction with other expressions like a wiggle expression in order to create more dynamic and procedural animations. If you enjoyed this tutorial, feel free to like and subscribe. If you have any questions about other ways you can use this expression, leave a comment down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.